All right. Hi, everyone. I'm glad you all could make it to Retiring for Three. This is a webinar that I'm really excited about. It has a lot of information in it that I think will be really helpful. Mary Anne Ehlert is from Protected Tomorrows out in the Chicago area, I believe. And she will be presenting, and one of her employees, Mary, is here as well. This will be a webinar with a presentation, and there's a chat box down to the bottom right-hand side. If you have questions, you can type in your questions in the chat box, and then at the end, Mary Anne will address those questions that you have. Mary, I think there is something else that, oh, I'm sorry. Let me introduce Mary Anne to you. She is from, like I said, Protected Tomorrows. I saw her webinar about a year ago, and it's really fantastic. And so I wanted to bring it to community partners. So thank you, Mary Anne, for coming and doing this for us.
Well, thank you, Denise. I'm excited to be here tonight. So, Mary, do you have any other things we need to cover before we get started?
There's just a couple of things. I'd like to let everybody know that we will be locking the presentation in about 5 minutes. If you lose your connection, please know that you'll be able to view the video on the website when it's available. We will be answering all the questions at the end, so please, anytime during it, please put your questions in the chat box. And then at the end, we're also going to have a handout for homework that you'll receive with a link to the recording of the class. And without any further ado, I'd like to present Mary Anne Ehlert.
And Mary, you'll be turning over the
yes,
session to me so I can share. Okay.
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay, great. So welcome everybody. I am thrilled to be here with you today, and we are going to cover a lot of information. So I am going to flip this over to my screen so we can start going through the data. And remember, save your questions to the end. If you have one that you can't wait, just write it down or put it in the chat box, as Mary said. And we are going for about 2 hours. We have a lot of data. We won't be talking the whole time. I'll be going through some stories, some examples, have some paper to take some notes. We're recording it, so if you heard something, you say, what did she say? You can go back to the recording, as well as just, you know, I want you to learn some things through this. So you're not going to learn everything. You're going to learn what matters to you. I know everybody's got different reasons for being on here tonight. So we're going to get started here. Okay. All right, here we go. So we're going to cover retiring for three, which means based on where you are now, and those of us who, I've learned this over time, that I know that the average person retires for themselves or retires with their spouse, but we are special. We get to retire for more than just ourselves. And sometimes people come into my office and they say they want some help with their retirement plan, because by training we're financial planners, but we focus mostly on families who have a special needs family member. And when I look at their plan that they have been done, there is nothing in their plan about another person in their life that they have to provide for during their lifetime and beyond their lifetime. So we're special. We have to do some things different than everybody else. So I thought I would introduce why I do this before we get started, so that you kind of have a background of where I'm coming from and how I've got to some experiences that I want to share with you. So this is my sister, Marcia. Marcia was 4 years younger than me. She had cerebral palsy. She was physically disabled as well as developmentally delayed. And when she was born, she had a twin sister as well. Her twin did not have a disability. And when as she grew up, we saw first that she couldn't keep up with her twin. And then when she was 2, she got the diagnosis. And I will tell you, when she was 2 years old, I was 6. There were 6 of us in the family. I have 4 older siblings, and then 3 older sisters and brothers, and then 2 younger. And they were the 2 youngest. But my mother pulled me aside on the day they got the diagnosis and said, you are going to be responsible for your baby sister when you get older. Now, that's not an untypical thing we hear, except I was told that it was going to be for the rest of my life. And so I was thrilled. I was one of those kids who loved responsibility, and I thought it was a reward that I got to have that job. I have no idea what it meant, but to me, it meant making sure my sister was going to be okay, and I was her protector. I just didn't know to the degree at which that responsibility was going to come into play. So as we got older, I wanted to make sure she did everything I did. That was my role. But there were times when people made fun of her, and my job was protecting her. And so one time we were in the store and someone was staring at her, and she could walk a little bit at that time. So she was hobbling through the store with me. And someone was staring at her, and I turned around and said, "What are you staring at?" And they were embarrassed because they were caught, and they hustled off. But Marcia turned around to me and said, "You tell him, Mare." And she was like 8 and I was 12. And it was my first aha that, wow, I'm gonna need to be your protector probably for a very long time. As we got older, I fought that, having that responsibility, because I did want to be a sister. And I tell you these stories because if you have a child with a disability, but you have other children, I hear a lot from parents and say, how do we be fair, and how do we make sure everything's okay? And in reality, someone will step up in the family and say, I want that responsibility. And I was the one in my family. So even though I had siblings, I was the one who was somehow connected to Marcia. And so as we got older, I fought that. I mean, I tried to take her out to places and took her to concerts and tried to make sure she had all the experiences, and went to Special Olympics with her and did all those things we do. I also got her drunk when she was 21. So I got her in trouble. I got in trouble. And she would always introduce me to people as the person who got drunk with her when she was 21 years old. So my mother always said, don't tell that story, it's embarrassing. But I tell it because even though she had a hangover, she was proud of it. And she kept teaching me something different. What she taught me was she wanted normal. She wanted the good, she wanted the bad. She'd say sometimes to me, don't protect me. And so as time went on, the older she got, the less physically able she was. And she was still living with my parents at the age of 34. Now, by that time, I had started my career. I was off doing things. But when I went to my parents' house, then my dad had a phone call that there was an opportunity for her to go live residentially. And my dad turned it down. And I went to my dad and said, why are you saying no? We all moved out. And my dad said, we're not ready. And so I learned from my parents how badly they wanted to protect her. I convinced them that she didn't necessarily want to be protected, that she wanted to have a full life. And she was happy with them, but she wanted more. And so she did go live residentially. She lived at a facility. She had her own room in a group home, and she loved it. She learned new things. Sometimes when I first brought it up to her, she was a little worried, not about her, but she was more worried about what my parents do without her. And so we as parents sometimes instill the fact that we don't realize we're doing it, that we want to keep our child home. So sometimes they're able to, sometimes they're not. But parent after parent, as the younger the parent, the more the parents are willing to start to prepare for independence of our child. My parents certainly weren't. And so I see that. I see all the fears, and now I have a child with a disability. I get it. I get worrying all the time. And those of us who are siblings, we're not the worriers. We're the ones who want to make sure everything's going to be in place. And parents are the ones who want to make sure everything's okay. And that's okay. There's a good balance. So my sister lived residentially in the facility for 9 years. And when she was, it was March 4th, 1995. I can always remember that day. That my dad had called me up. It was a Saturday night, and my sister had, Friday night this happened, Saturday morning early, he called me that she had, she had a seizure in her sleep. She couldn't wake up. She suffocated. She couldn't turn over and get her air, and she suffocated that night. So my journey changed. So up to that point, I was a caregiver for my sister and thinking about being guardian and thinking about all the responsibility and thinking about all the things that my parents needed to do, helping my parents do the planning they needed to do so that she would be okay if they were gone, and then all of a sudden the table got turned. But for some reason, I was supposed to go through that experience with my parents, and it allowed my parents and I over time to have lots of conversations about Marcia and about my parents' dreams, things they maybe might not have said to me that they were saying to me, and what my responsibilities would have been. So that's where my journey began. So I knew a lot about financial things in the world. I had worked in the financial industry for many, many years. And then in 1989 is when I started to step up and say, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for Marcia. What do I need to do? And when I started to talk to my parents back then, when my sister was still around, about how they had planned for Marcia. And my parents were really active. They were very involved in her life, probably like you are. They were very, very involved. And so when I asked them what they had done, they probably said that they had a will, they were providing for her, and they had disinherited her, and that I would be the one to take her share and take care of her with her share of the inheritance. Well, by that time, I knew a lot about financial planning and about estate planning and things like that. But this was something, it's like, well, why would you disinherit her? So at that point, back in 1989, I didn't know anything about SSI and Medicaid and all the limitations. I do now. And most parents know something. They just didn't know it deeply. And what my parents knew is that my sister couldn't have assets. And the attorney told them to plan that way. And in reality, it was just about the time the special needs trust was started. And I started to do some research and connect with some attorneys and find out we should be doing something differently. Now, what I kept thinking about as I started my own practice was that, wow, if my parents didn't know this, that they should do something different, why not? And what I realized, and I still realize when I talk to families, is we get through our worlds making sure our child is safe, making sure that they get the education that they need, making sure they get the medical treatment they need, all of those things that we have to do as parents, and then on top of it, deal with all the other school issues and IEPs and all those things. Why would families know that SSI and Medicaid were going to cause restrictions, that there's something special they need to plan? And actually, I still meet parents who are in their 80s and 90s, over 50-year-old child who don't know this. So it's not totally out there even yet that there's special planning that needs to be done, right? And then you throw into that the fact that not only do we have to do a special estate planning, but we have to think about our own retirement planning differently. So let's get into some of the things that we need to be thinking about. But I will tell you, my mission is your mission. That Protected Tomorrows has one mission: to make sure that your child is safe and happy for the rest of their life. That's our mission. And whatever that means to you is what it becomes to us. We want to make sure that your child is safe, that they have a full life, that you have done everything you possibly can do, and that you have peace of mind. So with that, I know that our lives are complex. I do know that. And I know that a normal life without a child with a disability, we have so many responsibilities. I look at it today, and I look at families who have their children at home, special needs or not. They have their children at home and they're trying to do their jobs at home, and it is really hard. But then we throw in all the stuff that we have to do, not only today, but all the planning that we have to do that is different, and we have to think a little differently, that it can be overwhelming. So we have developed a process, an 8-step process, and all I want you to think about is it's one step at a time. Because if we think about all the things we have to do, sometimes we get overwhelmed. I mean, I get overwhelmed when I think about, oh, I want to get healthy, and I need to exercise, and I need to eat right, and I need to do all these different things, and I should meditate. Oh my gosh, where do I start? It's even more complex for us. So we have a care planning program that we're going to take a few steps through today. And hopefully everybody will understand each of the different steps and what you need to be thinking about. And then out of that process is the process that you will build your dream team. So your dream team, and we'll be wrapping up with who is your dream team, but the person in the middle is your child, the person with the disability. And the dream team is going to be all the different players that you're going to bring into the team to support your child, as well as the family. And we'll be going through that whole process as we go through this and say, what are all the different people that are going to make up that dream team? Now, there's lots of information if you don't remember some things I said tonight. This will be recorded. We have a website, Protected Tomorrows, and there's lots of information on it. So I invite you to go explore that. We are also involved in a lot of different initiatives. So we have an architecture firm, and we are helping modify homes to make them accessible. We're looking for housing programs for families, and how can we piggyback on some of that. And then also, as our child, if our child can either do volunteer work or have a career, helping companies identify what kind of jobs could that person do, and how do we connect that company with the individuals or the groups who might be looking to employ people. And then finally, my last thing, I'll just share my little fun thing, is we have a charity, but our purpose of our charity is just to help other charities get started. And so the most recent one we did is Tales for Life. And we got involved with a young lady who had an accident at an amusement park and was disabled, severely disabled from the accident. And so there was a fundraiser to raise funds for some of the things she needed, and one of them was a service dog. We got involved in some of that fundraising, and I met a trainer who was going to train this dog. We got somebody to help us donate the dog. We had to raise some money for the training of the dog. It was really fun. Tales for Life put out an initiative to raise funds. We were lucky enough that someone here in Wisconsin, I happen to be in Wisconsin today, somebody here in Wisconsin happened to be a relative of Charlie Sheen, the actor Bad Boy. And so he donated money to us for our very first puppy that we trained. And out of that came Tales for Life. We have since spun it off to be its own charity and just shared with you one of our service dogs. And he is one of the dogs that was trained to be a companion and a seeing eye dog. So he's a charmer for sure. But we raise funds so that individuals who need a service dog can apply for a grant, help us raise more funds for the puppy, and then a puppy is selected specifically tied for that child and trained to be a support dog or a service dog or a therapy dog for whatever that child needs. But it is my fun thing to do. People always tease me because I go places and there's always lots of dog hair on me, but it's my fun. So that's us. One of the things I will tell you is we're going to go through a lot of the details tonight. And I only want you to walk away with doing something, okay? We're going to talk about financial things and legal things and care planning and all the things you have to do and tie it into your retirement and how do you retire and what's different about your retirement. But we're going to go through a lot, and in the end, I'm going to ask you to do something. We'll talk about that. But right now, I want you to just be aware of what I'm saying. Just take some notes. Say, as I'm talking about things, write down this applies to you or doesn't, or maybe it's not going to apply to you for 10 years or 15 years, but it's all information that I want to get into your head so that you can start to break it down into the pieces for yourself. So we're going to start with step one. And the most important thing is always step one, right? So this is what I know about building a plan. And it doesn't matter if it's a plan, your financial plan, it doesn't mean if it's a plan for your child or if it's a plan to start a business. If it's a plan to buy a house, if it's a plan to start a health program. There's two things we always have to do. One of them is to know what we want, to identify the best thing that we want to have happen out of this plan. And then the second thing we need to know is, how could it fail? So I'm going to ask you two questions, and I want you to think about these. And while I'm talking, maybe jot the answers down for yourself. So first question is, what is the best thing that can happen for your child's future? What is that? Take 10 seconds here and just write a few words down. What do you want to have happen? If I was asking the questions of everybody, I'll tell you what I think you're writing, but I want you to jot it down for yourself first. What's the best thing that can happen? And then secondly, the second question is, what is your biggest fear for your child's future? So what's the best thing that could happen? And what's your biggest fear? What do you think? Best thing that can happen. I'll tell you what most people say. So when I go around a room, if I'm doing this live, I'll ask people what's the best thing that can happen. And sometimes they say, my child will have friends, or sometimes the first question, the answer is always a cure. And I say, okay, it's got to be something that we can control. And maybe the cure, we can fund things, but we certainly can't, unless you're a doctor, come up with a researcher, come up with the cure. But what's the best thing that can happen beyond that is that they have a safe place to live, that they are financially secure, that they're happy. And that's always the number one answer. If we were playing Family Feud, the number one answer would always be that they're happy, that they are independent, that they, if they can work, they have a job, that they have a normal life as possible. Those are all the different things I hear. With any of those yours? And then the biggest fear, sometimes it's that they run out of money. Sometimes it's they are, secluded and they don't have anybody around them. The biggest answer I hear, and I do this around the country, is abuse. That people are afraid that someone will take advantage of their child. So what's your biggest fear? Just, and as we're going through this, if you have paper around and a pencil, write yours down for both of those questions, because these are the two things for the rest of the program that we're going to do that should be your filter. So if we're talking about the financial things that you need to do, every one of the financial choices you make should answer the question, is this going to be helping have my child's be the best it can be? What's the best thing that can happen? Well, if the choices you're making are those things that are going to work that way? And then secondly, is the choice I'm making going to help alleviate the fear that I have? Okay, so you can always say, if these are the two things, this thing that choice I'm making, is it going to help keep my child safe and not abused? And is it going to help my child be happy? Okay, all right. So those are your two benchmarks. Write them down, and I want you to keep those, because as we go on, and as you, 5 years from now, if you're doing something legally or whatever, you can look at those two things and say, is this going to make my child the best it can be? And is it going to keep my child out of it? All right. So once we know that, once we have some framework of how we're planning, the next thing we have to do is create a map of the future. Now, people tell me all the time, this is not possible. Things change too much. And I will tell you, I agree that when I do a plan for somebody, I don't care if it's a financial plan or a child's care plan, a plan is as good as what we know today, right? And then tomorrow, it's probably going to be different. But if we don't plan today, tomorrow, we're just as confused, and we can't find that peace of mind, and we can't find those best things to happen. So all the plan is like a map. If you're driving down the road and you have a map, and you come to a fork in the road and you know which one to take, the map helps, especially since we know where we want to get, right? So we keep those two benchmarks in front of us, because that's the ending point. But how we get to the ending point could have many, maybe we're going to take a highway, maybe we're going to take the back roads, but it has many ending points. So how do we start this? Well, this is the one thing I do know, that you are really important in this picture of the plan for your child, because you're it. I don't care if you have 1 child, 10 child, you're it, right? And so therefore, the person you have to take care of is you. We're going to take care of you first, right? Because if you don't plan and you run out of money, or things haven't worked out for you, how are you ever going to retire and make sure your child's okay or children are okay? How do you do that? So this isn't a financial planning session necessarily for you, but you are really important in this whole picture. So as we're going through it, let's talk about why it's so important. What do you have to know? Number one, you have to know your net worth. Now, most people I meet, and I ask them, do you have a net worth statement? They go, what's that? So now if you're a financial person, perhaps, but let's just review what you're going to need to know. You're going to need to know everything on the left. You need to know what you have. What's your home worth? How much you have in the bank? Do you have cars? You rent them? Do you lease them? What are your investments? What are your retirement accounts? Do you have IRAs? Do you have 401ks? What are they worth? Your real estate, just your home. Do you have a summer home or just your main home? Do you rent? Do you have any businesses? And you write down what they're all worth. That's the left side of the column. Okay. And I always suggest to people, in order to do this, you need to pull all your statements together. So pull out your bank account statements and pull out everything, and then attach it to the back of this. The next thing we need to know on the right side is, what do you owe? Not what you own, but what do you owe? You have a mortgage? Do you have a home equity loan? How much do you owe? You have car loans, student loans, credit cards. What are all your debts? Write them down. So then we have a total of your assets and a total of your liabilities. Then we're going to talk about why this is so important as we go on. You'll see, but this is the two documents that are the structure to your financial plan that are going to impact your child's future. The next thing we need to know is about insurance. It's a basic structure to anybody's plan. We need to know, do you have life insurance? What kind of life insurance? Is it term insurance? Is it whole life insurance? Is it variable life insurance? How much is it worth if I were to cash it out? And how much is it worth if I die? Two different numbers. The cash value is added to our net worth. So if my policy has $10,000 in it, or in this example, $50,000 in it, okay? The cash value is an amount that if I cash the policy out, I would get. So I'm going to add that to my net worth statement. There is a death benefit to that. Maybe this policy could have $1 million death benefit, okay? That death benefit isn't something I add to my net worth because it's not worth anything today, but it'll be worth something if I die. And that'll be really important when we're talking about the future for your child. I also want to know about things like disability insurance. Why? Because part of your net worth statement doesn't include the value of your insurance, but it certainly does impact your security, because if you became disabled and you run out of money because you became disabled, you're not going to provide for your child. So sometimes people say, well, you know what, why are we worrying about me? I'm worrying about my child. But worrying about you is what we have to do, because you're the structure that makes sure that this all works, okay? We also worry about long-term care insurance, because if you do everything right and you retire with a big bunch of money and a big pension, all that happens, and then you get sick when you're 85 and you thought you've done everything right because when you pass away, you got this big pot of money you're going to leave for your child. But then you become sick and it costs you $300 yourself. Your money can be used up really quickly, okay? These are all the facts that you need to gather. You also need to gather, are you going to have a pension when you retire? And if you're going to have a pension, is it going to pay only to you when you retire? Is it going to give something to your spouse? And there are pensions that if you and your spouse pass away might give something to your child with a disability, not to your other children. But if you have a child with a disability, your pension might pay 3 ways. Wow. To skip that would be a big mistake, right? So we have to know our assets. We have to know our liabilities. So we take our assets and subtract our liabilities. Okay, that's what we're worth alive. And then we add in the best death benefit, the extra amount we're going to get from the death benefit, and that's what we're worth dead. So there's a value of life and there's a value of death. And both of those play very significantly into your planning, what you're going to see. A lot of work to do, but you know what? When you do this kind of thing, and right now there's a pandemic going on, maybe people listen. I'm hoping that by the time the next people will listen to this recording, the pandemic is not going on. That would be my dream for everybody, right? But in reality, people will be listening to this soon. And we have some time perhaps because we can't go on vacations and we can't do a bunch of the things we used to do. So maybe this will be an activity that would be a good one for people to do. And I really thank the program for putting this on, because it allows us to help people during these times start thinking about this. What else do you have to do for your own planning? And when people look at this, they go, well, why does this matter? Why is she telling us this? We're talking about our child. So this is mom and dad, this is your cash flow. I make everybody do this. I don't care if people come into me with $50,000 or $50 million. I want to know this because this tells me everything I need to know about helping someone. So the left-hand column of a cash flow tells me what's coming in and what's going out today. So if you're working, you have salaries, and we're looking about annual money, or you can look about monthly money. People tend to understand it more if we do monthly. So what comes in every month? What comes, it's if you're still working, so you don't have Social Security yet, perhaps. But if you are retired, maybe you'd have Social Security, and maybe you'd have pensions coming in. Then we're going through and say, what are our bills? What's our housing bills? What's our utility bills? What's our transportation cost? What are insurance, entertainment, lifestyle? Under lifestyle on the second page, you will see something that says PWD Future Care. What's that? So what are we spending money on that goes into that bucket? PWD is person with a disability. So in today's dollars, you're still working. What are you spending on your child over and above your own expenses? This is your budget. What are you spending on clothes? But then I'm going to show you how to get that number in a little bit, but because we're going to do a separate budget for them. But we have to add that into our money coming in and money going out, right? And then we put our taxes in. So in the end, we know what is the cost to live every month. Now, why is this important? Because when we retire, if we just use our expenses, we are missing something. Because as long as, I'm going to use my son as an example. So I told you I had a sister with a disability and she passed away. I also have 3 stepsons, all with some learning disabilities, one significantly with mental illness, who's also has OCD and is blind. So he's pretty dependent upon support. He does get disability, but other than that, he needs a lot of support. So right now I help him. When I retire, I can't stop helping him. Okay, I have to still, he's living residentially on his own in disability housing, but that's his disability check isn't paying for everything. Who's paying for it? Me, right? Okay, so is that going to stop when I retire? So if I look at my retirement numbers and say, I think I'm going to need $5,000 a month to live, but if I'm spending another $1,000 a month to help him, I'm not living on $5,000 a month in my retirement. I'm living on $6,000 a month. How important is it that we understand that? And then this is 2 things you have to worry about besides yourself. How much you're going to provide for your child with a disability when you retire. If they're living with you or living in a group home, you still have to pay for things. And then, so here's this, we're working and then not working. So when we're working, we are paying out of our paycheck. When we're not working, we're paying out of our savings and our pensions and Social Security, but that has to cover our child too. Then there's a 3rd stage of our life. So 1 is working, 2 is retired, 3 is not here, but still supporting someone, right? So we have a 3rd column that is not us, but providing for someone else. Now, when I tell people to start doing some of these things, they really think I'm a little wacky because they go, how are we supposed to know the future? So if I were going to do your financial planning, I would ask you some questions. And so I want you to think about it. I would ask you this. I would ask you what do you have and what do you spend? And then I would ask you, how do you think you're going to live in retirement? And people are going to say, well, let's see. We think we're going to stay in the same house. Or we think we're going to get a downsize and get a different house. Or we're going to get a second house. And we think we're going to go some places. We're going to travel. And we think, we want to play some golf. Or we think we like to shop. Or we don't travel. We don't like to travel. People could kind of tell me what they think. So now I'm going to ask you the same question about your child. What does the future look like? Now, if you were 20 and I asked you about your retirement, you could probably tell me you want to retire when you're 50. You want to travel around the world. All the things you think, when you're 20. If I ask you the same question when you're 50, it's very different. And if I ask you the same question when you're 70, the answer is, again, very different. We don't know what the future holds. If there's anything that this pandemic has taught us, is we don't know what tomorrow holds, right? Because nobody thought 2020 would look like this. We had trips planned. We had fun things planned. We had going out with our friends planned. Didn't happen. We didn't expect, we have a child in a group home, that we were going to have to make a decision. Do they stay there until this is over? Or do we bring them home and we can't take them back until this is over? All these choices that we had to make that were so difficult. And so when I ask people, what do you think your child's life is going to look like when you retire? Where do you see them living? It's a hard question, but we're dreaming. We're saying, what do we want as of what we know today, just like we had to do for ourselves. And then next year we know more, so we change it. And 10 years from now we know more, so we change it. But we have to be thinking about the 3 stages of our child's life, just like your own. What does it look like now? What does it look like when you retire? And what does it look like when you move on to a different planet and your child's here by themselves? What do we have to do in all those cases? All right. So how important is your planning? Very, very important. And then we can start thinking about your child. You're first, though. If you put your child first, when you got on an airplane, as an example, the first thing that comes down is they explain to you if the oxygen mask comes down, what to do, okay? Then they say if you're sitting with someone who's a child, they tell you who's to put on first, right? They tell you to put your own on first, because you cannot help someone else unless you're okay. And that's kind of the story here, is that you have to take care of yourself first. And then we are going to start thinking about your child. So let's say you have planned for yourself. So now we're going to start thinking about your child's expenditures. Now we're going to start looking at their budget. And on this sheet we have, and we're going to give you these worksheets with your homework. The first column says, what do you think the expenses are while a child is living with you? And secondly, what do you think your child's expenses are when they're not living with you? Okay. Why would it change? Well, maybe they're in a group home. Maybe they're living with someone else. Maybe they're living on their own. And then what would happen if they're not living with you and you're not here is, again, a whole other thing. So the second column, where they're not living with you, you're also not here to support them in time, in man hours, and in money. So if I look at it and say, for my son, if I was doing his planning, I might, while I'm around, have a certain budget for transportation. Okay, so he's blind and he can't get around on his own if he has to go somewhere. So it's 2 answers, mom or Uber. So if mom is out of the picture, what happens to his transportation bills? They go up. So you have to go through the same thing with your child. If you're around, you're doing certain things, and if you're not, who's going to do that, right? Right. So when we went back to your cash flow, remember we said there's a line item on your cash flow. It's on the second page under lifestyle. We see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items down, PWG future care. That is going to be where we're going to put this number that we got in here. We got this number where we calculated out how much we're going to need on a monthly basis to support our child. And we're going to put that number into our budget because we have to pay. That's a budget number that we have to provide for. Are we like everybody else? You know, if a person doesn't have a child with special needs, their job is to get their children on their feet into college or into a trade school, or help them get into a job, help them get a job where they have health insurance, help them do all those things they need to do, teach them independence, and then we push them out of the nest and we help them succeed, right? We don't get to do that with our other children who have special needs. We have to always be there. And, you know, even with child without special needs, sometimes they're coming back and saying, Mom, I can't afford to do this and I really need some help. But that's a choice we're making. In this case, it's not a choice we're making, it's something we must do, right? So how do we build that budget? What are the things we have to be thinking about when we do it? So we have to think about, where's our child going to live? What kind of medical expenses they're going to have? What about their recreation? Okay, sometimes people say, well, I don't know what the recreation is. Well, maybe it's Special Olympics. And maybe to go to Special Olympics, they need transportation. Maybe they need uniforms. Maybe they have to pay for that. Maybe it's free. Different Special Olympics work differently. What are the different programs? What about education? You know, just because they're out of the school system doesn't mean education stops. What about if they work? How do they get to work? How do we teach them? How do we help them with that job? Okay. So those are all the things we want them to do. And we design their life as we think about it. This is a step of creating that vision. And it's all focused on what they like to do, just like your retirement would be on what you like to do. So if somebody likes to golf, somebody might have a budget that involves they have to pay for golf. Some people hate golf. Maybe their budget is, I have a friend who makes baby quilts. She loves it. Well, she had to go to school, some classes to learn it, but now she makes them and she has to buy the quilting material and she has to have the time. It's time and money. Everybody's got different hobbies. So into this, all of these, how we want life to look this is how we do it for our retirement, how we want our life to look. Then we put a budget to it. In this case, we're going to say, how do we want our child's life to look? And we're going to put a budget to it, okay? And the budget, the money for that budget has to come from certain places. The bottom of it comes from benefits. We might be saving for it. Maybe our child can help save for themselves. Maybe there's insurance things we have to pay for. Maybe it'll come from insurance, that we buy insurance on our lives, and maybe the money from when we pass away will come from that. Maybe family members will contribute. Maybe your child will do some work on their own. So all these different sources of money to fund this life care plan. So to do this again, so this is the hardest step. If anybody tell you what we're talking about is easy, it's not, okay? It's work. So we have to understand what's coming in and what's going out, because that's how we're going to figure out what we have to pay for, right? What we have to put into our budget is going to come from this work. So budgets consist of what's coming in, the income, and what's going out, expenses. And this could look different for your child if they're in school, if they're in a transition program, if they're out living on their own, or the last bucket of life without you. So check the box. Think about the box of where your child is now. Let's say they're in a transition program and they're 21. In 2 years, that we hope to be in the quote unquote adulthood stage where they're going to be independent as we can possibly help them be. And it's a different answer for everybody who's here, I'm sure. And then the last stage is the life stage where we're not there anymore. These budget items are impacted by each of those, right? So what's coming in? SSI, we're going to talk about benefits, Medicaid, family might be contributing, money's coming in, and then money's going out. For all these different categories, we talked about the detail, living and medical and recreation, education, other. If the income, let's just do a quick example. If the income was $10,000 a year and the expenses was $40,000 a year, we're short $30,000 a year. That's 1 year. And if we're talking at the adulthood stage where we have 40 years times $30,000 a year, that's a big number that we need to plan for, right? Okay. So we want to make sure if there's any money to come in from the government, we're doing everything right to get it. Right. So talking about the government. So we talked about a very hard stage where we're going to build everything. We're going to build the budgets. It's hard. You do it once and then you do it over and you tweak it and you tweak it, just like your own financial plan. My budget, my cash flow that I had last year isn't the same as this year. What happened this year? Not something I planned for. All that money I had planned for that trip I was going to take, I didn't have to spend, I could save. But maybe, I think most people are finding they can't go out to eat, but they're spending more on food shopping because they're home all the time and they're cooking and, you know, maybe doing things at home. Maybe they're buying a piece of workout equipment in their home because they can't go to the health club. We pivot to whatever's going on in our lives at the time. But now where do we get some of that money? So let's talk about government benefits. And this is a really important part for our children and is not easily known. It is not easily understood unless you understand the concepts, which we're going to talk about. So this is the benefit circle, okay? We're going to talk about the four types of benefits and what they are. There's really 2 kinds, and then each one is broken up into 2. So the first kind of benefit that our children are eligible for is something called an entitlement. An entitlement is something that we buy and we're entitled to it. So when I talk about those top 2 quadrants, I'm going to talk about entitlements. The bottom 2 are needs-based. Those are benefits that we get because we need them, not because we're entitled to them. And then of the entitlements and the needs-based, 2 of them have a cash component, and 2 of them have a program that pays for healthcare and programs and waiver kind of programs and job coaches and residential. So we're going to talk about one at a time. SSDI. So what is SSDI? SSDI is a program that pays for someone who is considered disabled and they bought it, okay? So all the time that I've worked in all my years, I've paid FICA. They take FICA out of my check. What is this FICA? FICA is Social Security and Medicare. That's the money that the government is taking out of our paycheck, and the employer is also contributing to. I'm going to this bucket so that if I become disabled, I get a check. Okay, how do I get that? So first, I have to prove I'm disabled. I have to show that I can't make substantial gainful activity, right? Substantial gainful activity is an amount that the government announces every year and says, if you cannot make this much money, we'll consider you disabled. So the amount of the SGA, substantial gainful activity, for 2020 is $1,260 a month. So if I cannot make that, I'm considered disabled. Now, it's not because I can't make it because there's a pandemic. It's not because that there's no jobs out there. It's because I have a disability. So if I cannot work because I have this disability and I cannot make that substantial gainful activity amount, which changes every year, if I can prove that, and I have paid into the system enough to get my Social Security, I will get that benefit. I have to prove I'm disabled, and I could even have $1 billion in the bank, but if I have paid into this system and I can prove I have a disability, I will get my check. And the amount of the check will depend upon how much I paid in, how long I worked, okay? So that's an entitlement. And with that entitlement comes 2 years later, a medical program. It's Medicare, same thing seniors get. It's what pays, and we paid into it. Remember, the FICA pays Social Security and Medicare. So 2 years after I get my disability approval, I will go into the Medicare system for my health coverage. That's how it works for those of us who have worked. So what happens to our child who has a disability, who hasn't worked, or perhaps has worked somewhat, can't work anymore, but they don't have any quarters? They don't have enough quarters. You know, I have to have 20 current quarters of disability credit to get that one on the top. And so my child is 18 years old. He's never worked. He was born with a disability, and he doesn't get the chance to have an entitlement. What do I do? So there's this other benefit called SSI. Now, different rules, a lot of different rules, but it's needs-based. So we have to be needy to get this. Okay, we're not entitled to it. We get it because we're needy. So there's different rules. First, we have to prove we have a disability, and 2, we have to prove we're needy. Now, if your child is under 18, the rules apply to you, mom and dad. If your child's 18 or older, it applies only to them. So I'm going to talk here about your child, not about you. So if your child's 15 and you have a job, your child's not going to get this benefit. However, if your child is now 18 or 1 month after 18, so if their birthday was April 23rd, May 1 is the day we can apply, because in April, sometime, they were under 18 and they could talk to you about your benefits. So know that they could cut your child off if you do it before the month after their 18th birthday. So now they're totally 18 for a month. We're going to go with this SSI, Supplemental Security Income. We have to prove 2 things. Disability. How do we prove that? We prove your child, because of their disability, cannot make substantial gainful activity. In 2020, that was $1,260 a month. So we have to prove with medical records and IEPs, social worker reports, we have to prove that your child cannot hold a job and make that much. Now you're saying they're 18, they haven't worked yet, they're probably still in a transition program. You're right. The medical records will prove to Social Security that our child will not be able to get that job, right? So that's the first thing we have to prove. The second thing we have to prove is that they're needy. So what can they have in 2020 rules? They can have a house, a car, a prepaid funeral, $2,000, and an ABLE account. So the house, you're probably not going to buy your child a house. And if they do, and they can't live in it, then it's a house that is a problem. So we're probably not going to put our child's name on a house unless they inherited it somehow or it just worked out that way. A car, only if they can drive. Prepaid funerals, sometimes we do that because we want to plan for the future. Maybe we have money in our child's name that we want to spend it, and that's something we can spend it on. And then the final thing is the $2,000. So what's in that $2,000? Checking accounts, savings bonds, anything that they might have that is theirs with their Social Security number on it. Could be, they ask about, do you have any mineral rights? Do you have any oil rigs? You know, a lot of things some of us wish we had. Anything with your child's name and Social Security on. There's two things that get our child in trouble sometimes: savings bonds and life insurance. So savings bonds, well, you know what? How can they know what you got? They're in the drawer. Grandma gave it to them 20 years ago, 18 years ago, 15 years ago. How can they know what your child has? Well, there's Social Security numbers associated with them. If your child has savings bonds, you need to report them. If they only have one savings bond with $250 and that's all they have, we don't care. But of course, we're talking about that $2,000 limit, right? So savings bonds, if you have savings bonds for your child, pull them out, check how much they're actually worth online. And if they're worth too much, you're going to have to either, you know, you look at them and say, does your child own them or do you own them? We have to find out who the owner is, because if you're the owner, they're not theirs. If they were given to your child with your name on it. So if your child has a savings bond with their name but your Social Security number, or their Social Security number, your name, there's lots of things you can do to get that Social Security number out of that bond out of your child's name, cash it out in your Social Security number perhaps. Just beware of those. If you have too much money, you might have to spend some of it. Okay. What about life insurance? I said life insurance is a problem. When is that a problem? Well, many times parents, when they buy life insurance for themselves, the agent will say, well, you probably should buy some life insurance in your child too. So you buy this policy. If it's term insurance, it has no value. I don't care if you have term insurance. It has no value. But if you have whole life insurance or variable insurance or universal life insurance, it has a cash value to it. And even though you bought it for your child, when they turn 18, it could be construed as theirs, and the cash in the policy could be theirs. So if you have a policy, you ask the agent to make sure that your child never becomes the owner when they turn 18, so that cash value will not stop them from being disqualified from this program. Okay? So let's say we get through all of this and we prove they have the disability. There's one other thing your child can have is the ABLE account, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. So I'm just going to note it here that you can have one and it won't count against your child. Okay. Okay. So here we are. We got your child approved for disability, and we got a child. And I'll tell you another thing. When you apply for SSI, the very first thing that happens is they look to see if your child has that benefit up top, the SSDI. And they look at it and you find out your child doesn't have 20 quarters and you get a decline. That's normal. The first thing Social Security does is say, does this person have enough credits? And they say, no, send out the decline. The decline, be careful, it's not the decline for SSI, it's a decline for SSDI. They will continue to process the application for the SSI after that. So let's say they determine your child does have a disability and doesn't have too much money. What else could happen? So the next thing they ask you is, where is your child living? Excuse me. So let's say your child is living with you and you say, my child's this, of course they're living with me. They're still in school. They're 18 years old. The answer, if you say they're living with you, will be considered in-kind income. And your child, how much is SSI? Do we care? It's $783 a month. We care. Okay, that $783 a month can help your child. So, but if you say your child's living at home, they're going to get 1/3 less. Why? Because if they're living at home and they're 18, you're providing them a free place to live. So we don't want to answer it that way. You don't want to say, yeah, they're living with me. Yes, they're living in my house in a separate household and they're paying me room and board. How much? $300 a month. I looked it up on Craigslist and that's what a room in my house is worth. Sounds kind of goofy, but that's what we have to do. Your child's an 18-year-old. They should be paying room and board. There are, sometimes we say people, instead of doing room and board, they call it their cost sharing, and the child's going to pay their fair share. You can do that sometimes. Problem is, if the number of people change in the house, the expenses of the house change, you're constantly having to report that. Just be aware of it. And you can look up the difference between cost sharing and room and board. A lot of people say, well, if you say room and board and they're paying you rent, you got to report that. You do. But in reality, you're taking your expenses against it. So, you know, room and board just seems easier to me. You may hear people say other things, but to me, if your child's paying you room and board, they're going to give you some of that money because they're living with you. And if you say they're paying room and board to Social Security, when they get their benefit, they got to pay you room and board. It's a learning tool, okay? So all that information goes in. Now, if they tried to give you a hard time by paying room and board, just stick to your guns, answer the questions. They'll give you something to sign between you and your child that say your child's paying you room and board, and you sign it, you fill that out. So everything gets approved, it goes in, they determine everything is correct. They will have you come in probably as the parent and become one of you to become the payee on that money, so that the money goes into an account with your child's name and Social Security number with you as the payee. What does that mean? That you are going to pay the bills for your child, okay? Now, let's say it takes 5 months to get approved. It used to not take that long, but it could. And so your child's going to get $783 times 5, you know, lump sum. Your child's going to have more than $2,000, okay? Because when they apply and it takes that long, they're going to pay the payment back to when you're applied. What's the first thing you have to do to make sure that money isn't too high is you're going to take 5 times the $300 rent, because the child's supposed to pay you room and board. They're going to give you that money. Now you brought it down. Then you have to say, what else did I pay for my child in those 5 months? And you got to make sure you get reimbursed, because your child's account cannot go over $2,000. And every month you got to watch that. And if your child's supposed to be paying part of the room and board and they're supposed to be paying expenses, make sure that they do that. All right. So your child's getting their SSI, and then they also get Medicaid. Now, some states it's a separate application. In California, it's called Medi-Cal. In some states, it is one application. So what is Medicaid? Most people see Medicaid as paying health care. Do you need it? Do you need that health coverage? Maybe not. Maybe your child's still on your health insurance. How long can they stay on your health insurance? Well, in Obamacare, or Affordable Care Act, a person with a disability can stay on your health insurance until they're 20. A child can stay on the parent's health insurance until they're 26. Okay? But many states have a statute that says if the child has a disability, they can stay on the parent's health insurance as long as the parents have the health insurance. We just have to follow the rules. So, homework. Make sure that you understand the rules that apply for the state. Now, the state, Medicaid is a state program. The rules for that come from the health insurance or the state where your work is. So if you work in a company that is domiciled in Illinois, Illinois rules apply. If you work in Illinois for a company that's domiciled in New York, New York rules apply. You've got to find out what the rules are for that particular state to see how long will they allow your child with a disability to stay on the health insurance plan. But many allow your child to stay. So if your child can stay on your health insurance, do you care about this Medicaid? Yeah, you do. Because Medicaid might have copays, or your health insurance might have copays that Medicaid will pay. But the biggest reason is Medicaid is a program that funds programs, okay? So if your child's coming out of transition and they're going into another kind of program, you probably have to have Medicaid to get them in. It's the ticket. I call it the golden ticket. So if you want your child in these after-school programs, you want your child to have a job coach for a job, or your child's up on the list to be funded for residential, you will not get that funding without Medicaid. Many times people will say, well, I'm not going to get it now, I'll do it later. Just wait. Wait till they're through school, wait till they don't have health insurance anymore. I'm a big proponent of doing what you as the parent need to do. Do not leave the job for somebody else. Because by the time that your child turns 18 and you get these programs, and the time that your child, you don't work anymore, a lot can happen to you. And if you want your child to have all the benefits, go for it, get them. Don't depend upon other people to do what your job as a parent should be. You're going to hear me very often say, you are going to be the advocate for your child for as long as you are on this planet. You are the one who's going to make sure that everything gets done. And this is a really important step. Okay, so here's our benefit programs, right? Is that all you need to know? That if your child's working, they're going to get the SSDI. If they're not working, they're going to get SSI. Is that all you need to know? Not quite. So this is something most parents don't know. And this is homework, because if you're going to start doing a planning for your child, you need to know what's going to come in for them while you're working. You need to know what's going to come in for them when you retire, and we need to know what's going to come into them when you die, right? Because we're going to do 3 budgets. So this is a sample Social Security statement, not of your child's, but of a parent. So I'm going to tell you how to read it. So let's look at this one. It says for retirement, this particular individual, I'm going to pretend like this is a dad and that there's a mom as well as we go through this. This one says this person would get at age 67, $1,800, a little over $1,800 a month. But if they wait until they're 70, they're going to get almost $2,300 a month. But if they take their retirement early, they're going to get $1,197 a month. So the sooner you start it, the less you get, right? Okay. Everybody's numbers are different. If you started working when you're 18 or 16 and you paid in and you had a high paying job, these numbers could be $3,600 a month at age 70. If you made less, it could be $1,000 a month at age 70. Everybody's different. This is why you need your own. There's another number on here under that that says how much you would get if you became disabled. Why do we need that? We need that for your retirement plan, because if you become disabled, we need to know how you're going to get to retirement. Then there are these other numbers a lot of people don't know. So we go under survivors. There's a number here that says your child will get $1,257 a month. When will your child get $1,257 a month? So child, first of all, means your minor child or a disabled adult child. Okay. So if you die, retire, or become disabled, your child is eligible to receive at your retirement or disability 1/2 of your age 67 benefit. And when you die, they're eligible to receive 2/3 of your age 67 benefit. Now, they don't do both mom and dad. They're going to pick the highest one, right? So, and if your child goes to, let's go back to this diagram right here. SSI and Medicaid go together, okay? So when the child gets SSI, they get Medicaid. I'll tell you something about Medicaid. It pays hospitals really well, pays drugs really well. Most doctors don't like it. Very few doctors. You got to search for a Medicaid doctor. Medicare pays doctors really well, pays hospitals really well, and does not pay drugs. So Medicaid is really nice for hospitals. It's also really nice to get your child into programs. But when your child goes into Medicare, they have a better choice of doctors. It pays their hospital bills, and Medicaid can pay the copays and the drugs. So we're going to talk about this piece now because we've seen the numbers. So let's see what happens when your child gets some benefits. I'm going to go through one example for you. When the person with a disability turns 18, mom and dad are still working. So we apply for SSI for the child and Medicaid. So child, we're going to use this year's numbers. This is 2020. The child will get SSI for $783 a month if you do it right. Okay, we're going to assume we did everything right. Now the world's going to start changing. Dad is going to retire. Dad's going to retire, and he is going to say, when we back in these numbers, Dad is going to say, I am retired and I want my benefit. And he's going to retire at his full retirement age. But what's going to happen is he will get his full retirement amount. But mom is also going to retire. And mom can get her own or half of dad's, whichever is greater. So mom's was a small amount, or mom didn't even work and get a Social Security record. So we're going to give mom $900, $902, which is half of dad's. So when we give dad and mom the money, it's all coming out of dad's bucket, right? Because mom didn't have any work record. So dad's going to get $1,800 a month, mom is going to get $900. And we look at that and we say, well, there's another number on here that matters a lot. The most they can pay, so we go back to survivors, there's 2 numbers I want you to know how to read. the one that said, what is the child going to get? And then look at the bottom there. It says the total family benefits cannot be more than $3,116 a month. That's the most they can pay on dad's record. Okay, so dad retires. Dad gets his amount, mom gets half. What was left of the $3,116 to give to the child? We calculate all those out, and the most they can give to the child from Social Security is that $410 a month. That's all that was left after they paid dad and mom out on the max, okay? So if the child gets $410 of Social Security, what happens to their SSI? So SSI is to bring you to the $783 a month, all right? But when they start getting other money, they decrease the SSI because they're getting other income. So if the child's getting $410 from Social Security, they're going to drop their SSI. So they were getting $783 a month, and now they're getting $783 a month, okay? But it's coming out of two buckets. This is the really good thing. This is where the magic happens. So you retire, and your child goes into that top bucket. We call it DAC, Disabled Adult Child. When you retire, now the thing you have to know is that you applied for it when your child was 18, you proved they were disabled. When you retire, there's a question on the application that says, do you have a child with a disability? You say yes, and then you go and apply for this benefit. You have to prove your child's still disabled, again. But when you do that and you prove it, your child goes up into that other bucket. So now we get 3 buckets full, right? What happens? 2 years later, we have 4 buckets full. Because 2 years after your child goes in for disability, gets your disability on your record, that DAC benefit, they become eligible for Medicare. This is a part that needs a lot of thinking, and it's very complicated. So why do we care? So let's say dad was a worker and he was working, and mom had a part-time job because she was home raising kids. Dad has a job and he's providing all the health insurance. Dad is going to retire. So when dad retires and goes through this whole process, he gets his Social Security, mom gets part of the Social Security, child gets put into this program here. Remember the SSI and SSA, they go into Medicare, and the child goes into Medicare 2 years later. So dad retired at age 67. 2 years later, the child gets health insurance, Medicare. Dad lost his health insurance because he went into Medicare. But the child has to wait 2 years to get Medicare. So parents get it at 65, okay? They don't have to take it at 65, but if they take it, they retire at 67, they'll get it at 67. But dad retires and all of a sudden the health insurance is gone. So for 2 whole years, the child has only Medicaid and no good doctor coverage, right? They were on the health insurance of dad. Health insurance went away because dad retired. So this is where we have to really think it carefully. Maybe we wanted dad to apply for Social Security at 67 because it's bigger number, but maybe mom should have done something different. Maybe mom had her own work record. Maybe it's a different example. Maybe mom had a work record and maybe she was only going to get $200 of Social Security if she takes it earlier. What if mom, instead of waiting till 67 like dad, mom said at age 65, I'm going to go for mine. I'm going to take my $200. She would have got more taking half of dad's, right? Well, let's talk about how it's going to work. So mom is 65. Mom is going to take hers. Dad's still working. Mom applies for Social Security. She doesn't take the Medicare yet, but she applies for her Social Security. She gets $200. It's enough to pay for a nice dinner, okay? Once the restaurants open up. So mom's going to get $200. But what happens when mom goes into Social Security at the age of 65 and says, give me my own record? I don't want dad's. Give me my own. Mom takes her $200. Her child can get into the Social Security world. Now, the child's not going to get as much. They're going to get half of mom's age 67. So maybe the child's going to get $75. I don't know, a small amount. But the minute the child goes into that bucket, 2 years later, they get Medicare. So what happened here? We'd let mom take a small amount. Okay, she took her own. She's eligible at 65. And then 2 years later, dad applies. Dad loses his health insurance. But in those 2 years, the child was getting Medicare 2 years later When dad turns 67, quits his job, health insurance is gone, child gets Medicare right away because it started when mom applied 2 years before. Complicated and needs a lot of thought process. But it's possible to do some of that thinking about maybe the lower wage earner should get into the system sooner so that the child who's going to lose health insurance and only be on Medicaid, we figure out 2 years before dad retires, somebody needs to get in it, if ages work, okay? So there's a lot of science to calculating these numbers. Now, did mom really get goofed up by taking such a low number? No, because when dad starts his Social Security, mom then can go to half of his. So I would tell you something else. There's lots of software out there that will help mom and dad figure out when to take it. Sometimes dad should wait till 70, sometimes, you know, and then mom should take hers sooner. Sometimes dad should take his first. All these things that you can do. You can go into the software and figure out when mom and dad should take theirs. None of the software covers this. None of the software covers what happens about the health insurance of your child. So you need to know, A, does your health insurance allow you to keep your child on your health insurance past the age of 26? And if it does, great, your child can stay on that. Even if you got to pay for it, it's worth it. But who's going to retire when, and when will that health insurance go away? And do we have someone in the family that can apply for Social Security so the child can get into Medicare? Now, this all might be, we just went through something with this with a family, and we went through all these calculations, and we realized the child's been working, and if the child keeps working and making enough, just enough to get into the Social Security world from SSI, they can get that disability on their own record if they're working. So if the child goes from SSI to SSDI because they're working, we don't have to worry about mom and dad because the child will get into Medicare when they have enough credits. So knowing your own Social Security record is a really important thing. All right, we covered a lot here, right? What happens when mom and dad pass away in that original scenario? When mom and dad pass away, the child will get the Social Security amount. Remember, we talked about 2/3 of the highest wage earners' normal retirement amount. So you need to know, we went through a lot of numbers here. You need to know a couple things. You need to know how to find this record for yourself. So mom and dad, go to socialsecurity.gov and pull out your record. That's where you start. It's homework. It's a very important piece of homework. They used to send these to you every year. Then they started sending them every 10 years. Then they quit sending them. So go to socialsecurity.gov, open up your own Social Security record, and get these numbers for yourself because you can lay them out and do your planning. Okay? So this little worksheet we'll send you to. This little worksheet I did to say, what do you assume might happen? Okay? So on the top it says, first, is dad still working? Is mom still working? Let's get some facts out. Okay? What age do you think you're going to retire? Who has the health insurance? What age do you think dad and mom are going to take Social Security based upon all that? And fill in all these buckets. And then the bottom, after you fill it all in, is what you thought. Then start thinking, okay, but if dad quits, how much time are we going to have a period of time where the child doesn't have health insurance, or can they work? So the top is what you think. And then as you go through and get your Social Security records, the bottom is what you know, what you think and what you know, okay? And if you have a problem with this, you know, you call up, make an appointment with us. We can help you think through some of this, okay? It's complicated. I'm not going to say it's easy, but just the fact that you know that you have to do something different gives you power to do the things you have to do. Okay, so the things to remember. Know the health insurance laws for the state that your company is in and know what your company does about it. 2, pull up your Social Security records. Those are the keys. And 3, as the laws change, we will continue to have education programs like this because, you know, we just heard that there were some things happening with our president that said maybe we're not going to contribute to Social Security if he gets reelected, and maybe it's going to stop paying into contributing to Social Security at least till the end of the year. How's it going to impact us? I don't know. But I do know that if people aren't paying into programs will change. So it's important, again, for you as the parents to keep it up to date with what's happening. Okay, so I just told you all this stuff, okay? I told you a lot of complicated stuff. So let's talk about something that might be a little easier, okay? How are you gonna do everything? If we went through and said, we calculated out that your child needs a lot, first thing we did, Well, first thing we did, we said, so what do you want? What's the best thing that could happen? And what's the worst thing that could, what are you afraid of? When you're doing the plan, you're thinking about what's the best thing that can happen. Am I doing everything financially and thinking about all the holes and thinking about things that might be problems? Then I'm thinking about, well, how much are we going to need? And we figure those numbers out. So if our child can only have $2,000, how can we leave them the money they're going to need to be safe? So let's talk about that. You cannot leave an inheritance directly to your child, bottom line. You can't do what my parents did. What my parents had done is said, we're going to pick Mary Anne and we're going to have her hold Marcia's money and then she'll take care of her. I loved her. I was a financial person. I would have done it. But what if I die and I leave the money to my other children? Will they take care of her? Probably not. They might buy her a nice Porsche to drive around in if it was that much money. What if I'm holding the money and I get sued? Or what if I'm holding the money and something else bad happens and I can't hang on to it? Or what if I'm just I need the money and I borrow it thinking I'll put it back and I don't? Or what if I have the money and I think, well, something happens to me and my husband, I'll do it. So I put it in a joint tenancy. And then one day he comes home and decides he wants a divorce. And then it's at risk in the divorce. So no matter what our good intentions as a siblings, giving it to a sibling to hold is not a very good choice. Stuff happens. Okay, we don't know what tomorrow holds. And then there's these other kind of spendthrift trusts that we sometimes set up for our other children to say, you know what, they're not really good with money. Let's set up a trust for them that somebody else will watch over it until they're a certain age and then they get control. None of those are good answers, but there is a good answer. So a third-party special needs trust. Now this is legal stuff. I'm telling you, I'm not an attorney, but I tell you what you need to ask the attorney and what the attorney can do for you, okay? And not all attorneys can do this, so we'll talk about that. So a special needs trust is also called a discretionary special needs trust. It is also called a third-party special needs trust. What does that mean, third party? It means it's for your child, but they can't control it, and they can't put money in it, and they can't take money out of it, okay? So this trust that's a third-party trust is funded by inheritances, and it's funded by gifts or savings that we want to do. It's a piece of paper that the attorney draws up, lots of pieces of paper. It looks like a book, and it has the rules of how the money is going to be spent. It can only be used for supplemental care of your child, not basic support. That's what the government money is for basic support. This is for over and above that. If the government doesn't pay for it, the trust can pay for it. It's spent for supplemental care. And when your child passes away, you're going to say who gets it. So I'm going to open up a trust for my son. My will's going to put money into it. It's going to be for my trust, my son, after I pass away. And then when he passes away, I'm going to say who gets it. I'm going to say charities. I'm going to say my other kids. Okay. Those are the kind of the rules of the road. There's some more rules too. It's a lot of paper. So if the attorney gives you one-page special needs trust, probably not. Okay. It's probably not a very good trust. Probably not a sufficient trust. It's all the rules of how this money can be spent, and it's very detailed. Social Security wants us to have all these rules in the trust, and so the attorneys know how to do that. So who can set one of these up? There's only one person who can't, your child. You can set it up, grandma can set it up, brothers and sisters can set it up. The attorney drafts it based upon the rules, and you sign it, okay? Who's in charge of it? You, parents. You can be in charge of it as long as you're alive. You set up the trust. You say who it's for, your child. You say who's in charge of the money, you. You say if something happens to you, who's in charge of the money after you? Can't be your child, can be other children, can't be that child with a disability. And then who's going to get it when your child passes away? You set all the rules up, the attorney drafts it. Okay. Usually one special needs trust per child. So if you have 2 special needs children, you're probably going to have 2 special needs trusts. And it's supposed to be irrevocable if there's money in it. What does that mean? It means once you've set it up and there's money inside the trust, you can't change it for any, just willy-nilly. You can only change it if the law requires you to change it, okay? That makes Social Security confident that this money is used appropriately, and you just can't give it back to somebody or you can't give it to somebody else. Okay. So if you have a trust, we're going to look for the words that this is an irrevocable trust. Now, people many times say to me, oh, I heard Mary Anne talking about this. I'll set it up when my child's 18. Or I'll worry about it later. Well, you kind of get to later, right? And so if you say, I'm going to do it when my child's 18, and then you pass away when your child's 16, and they inherit money because you didn't do this, they're not going to get benefits when they're 18 because they're going to have money, right? So you don't put it inside your will, and you don't put it inside your trust. What does that mean? So some attorneys who don't do this very often will say, I can do it cheaper for you if you have a will, and inside the will, I put the language that says, when I pass away, create a special needs trust. So you don't really have a special needs trust until you die. So if somebody else wants to put something inside of it, or if the law changes between now and the time you die, you don't have a special needs trust. And the one thing I know about parents is we want peace of mind, and we want to know that we have done everything we possibly can do. So we want to have the attorney create a standalone document. You walk out with a book that says, I have a special needs trust. And I signed it. I have one. Okay. It allows two things. It allows the trust to follow the rules of today. The trust will say that. And the rules are good today. So if the rules are crummy later, it's following the rules of today. Secondly, other people can use it. Other people can piggyback on what you did. So if you create the special needs trust and grandma wants to leave something to your child, grandma can leave it to the trust that you created, instead of grandma having to create a special needs trust all by herself. So you come out of the attorney's office. How do you get money in there? Well, a couple ways. One, your will can leave it to it. So once you create this trust, your will can say, leave some money in there. You can have life insurance, and life insurance beneficiary can be the beneficiary is the special needs trust. You can make your 401k or your IRA have a beneficiary of the special needs trust. The one thing you can't do is you can't leave money directly to your child anymore. You're always going to refer to the trust. So my son, Mark, I never leave anything to him anymore. It always says Mark Special Needs Trust. That way I'm not going to have a mistake, right? If I want to save for my child, I can open up an account in the name of the trust. Okay, you're sitting here listening to me and you go, oh boy, we already goofed. We already goofed. We already have a trust in our child's name. Or grandma already left money to our child. Now we're all goofed up. What are we going to do? So there is another kind of trust called a payback special needs trust. It's also called an OBRA 93 trust. And it's sometimes called an oops trust by me. So that's so you remember that we goofed up and oops, we got to fix something, right? So grandma leaves your child some money. Grandma leaves your child $50,000. And now your child has more than two, and they're going to be all goofed up, and they're going to lose their benefits. So what we can do is we create one of these trusts. The attorney creates it. We take the $50,000 that they got. We put it in this trust. Money works. It works. Your child gets your benefits back. Downside. Let's look at this diagram. This diagram says the money is for your child's supplemental care, but when your child passes away, the Medicaid, the state that paid the Medicaid gets reimbursed for what they paid. Not the best result, but it's better that your child keeps their benefits. Right? What if you are divorced and the court orders child support to be paid to you by your ex? Child support when your child's under 18 belongs to you, but when your child's over 18, it belongs to them. And child support can make them not receive their benefits. So this trust can also be used for that. When you get divorced, you can hope to have child support paid for the lifetime of your child, but the child support could be paid to one of these payback trusts. You are the trustee. Child support goes in it, and then you pay bills. Now, the way this works is the trustee of the trust never gives the money to your child. They are paying bills for your child. So if your child needs a dentist that the Medicaid doesn't pay, the dentist gets paid directly. The money doesn't go to the child and then to the bills, it goes directly to the bills. So child support can be paid to one of these. It will never be then deemed to be your child, and then they get to keep their benefits. Okay. How do you find one of these attorneys who knows what they're doing? I will tell you, a very small percentage of attorneys do this. First of all, it needs to be an estate planning attorney, not an attorney who handles real estate, not an attorney who handles business stuff, not a tax attorney. This is a estate planning attorney who happens to have special needs expertise and has done a lot of it, okay? So you can go to our website. There's a directory on the website that lists the attorneys. If you can't find one in your area, then you can call us, you can email us, and we'll try to help you find one. organizations that these attorneys belong to, we can help you find an attorney, or we know lots of them. Okay. All right, that was the easy stuff. I'm going to talk about some hard stuff for a minute. So it's not impossible. It's possible to find people who can manage the trust for you. And we'll talk in a minute about some new options we have for people in that regard. But the hard decision is who's going to step into your shoes and make medical decisions, government benefit decisions, school, employment, where is your child going to live? What are they going to do with their life? Who's going to step into your shoes, right? So in your will, if you are the guardian, you can name the people that you are suggesting become the guardian. Just because you put it in there doesn't mean they are the guardian. They still have to go to court, but you are nominating them to have the job. So the people you pick for them, can they really understand what you're asking them to do? They understand that it's going to outlast them and they're going to have to put something in their will when they pass away to pass the job on? Should it be your brother and a wife, or should it be your brother? Or maybe it's just the wife. Who are the people that would have that job? And should it be the same people as the money people? I typically say pick the money people for the money job and pick the care people for the care job. They're different kinds of people, but only you can do that. And only you can have those thought discussions with attorneys and friends and with us or whoever you want to think about who you're thinking about for those jobs. So you put in your will, if something happens to you, who's going to step into your shoes? But when your child turns 18, what happens? So when your child turns 18, are you still their parent? Absolutely. But when your child turns 18, they are their own legal adult. So what happens? A, you do nothing, you let your child have all their rights. But even if they do that, you would still, if they have the capacity to make decisions, maybe they can just sign powers of attorney and give you some rights, okay? But if they don't have capacity to do that, you may be going to court when their child turns 18. You become their guardian or conservator, okay? Depending upon the state you live in, it's got different rules. But you're going to go to court and you're going to say to the judge with medical information, my child cannot make their own decisions, cannot make their own financial decisions, cannot make their own medical decisions, and we want to have the court appoint someone to have that job, okay? Those are your options. Do nothing, have your child sign a power of attorney to give you some rights, or you become their guardian. If you do become their guardian, then again, in your will, you have to name who would step into your shoes to have that job, okay? And guardianship is a court proceeding. You have to go to court, you have to talk to a judge, you have to have reporting, and then once a year you have to say, so what is the court doing? The court is giving you the job to be responsible for this person. So the court's giving you the job. You have to report to them and tell them how you're doing, you know, how's the child doing, right? The other question the attorney is going to ask you when you're in talking to the attorney about guardianship and trust, they're going to say, okay, this is how much money you have. Remember the attorney told you you need to do some planning for yourself? The attorney is going to ask you to bring that net worth statement. Why? Because they want to know how big is your estate, and they want to know how to help you divide this pot. So there's a couple of pieces you should have ready. A, you should have your net worth statement. And B, you should have the plan you did for your child so we know how much they need. So let's say your net worth statement says you're worth $4 million with all of your assets and all the death benefit of life insurance. So if you're a couple and you each have $1 million of life insurance and you have $2 million in between your house and your 401k, you have $4 million. Maybe you have $500,000. Let's just use $4,000. And you determine that your child needs $2,000 to take care of themselves, but you have 5 children. How are you going to split it? Are you going to be equal? Okay, because there's the head versus the heart. The heart tells us that we are supposed to be equal, but our head tells us that we are supposed to think about the numbers. So there's no right answer here. How much do you have and how much does your child need? And how are you going to do that? I will tell you, my answer was 3 children. One definitely needs more support than the others. But my heart tells me, wow, these kids really had some tough times. And so I don't want to disinherit one. So I'm going to leave my estate 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. But I'm going to buy some life insurance on my life so when I pass away, the special needs trust has some extra funding. That solved my need of both. Everybody's different. Everybody's got a different answer. Okay, so what are the tools you need to do all this planning? 1, the trusts. You have to know the right trust. Another tool that I want to talk about is the ABLE Act. So the ABLE Act is some legislation that passed, and it's a modification to the 529 Act. So if you know anything about 529s, those are college savings plans. So right now, there was always this legislation that says we can save tax-free for a child to go to college. So there was this whole impetus years ago to say, well, if you can save for a child to go to college, why can't we save for children with special needs? The legislation went through many iterations. It started one way and it looks a different way. But the 529 Act is this. It's a savings plan created by the states. So each state has one, but not every state has one, that allows us to do tax-free savings for a child with special needs. The money can be used for approved expenses for special needs, but it's a very broad approval. It's only for people who had a disability that occurred prior to age 26. There's some legislation on the table to help make that older, because sometimes people become disabled or get identified as being disabled at an older age. So we hope that that will go get an older age, but right now it's 26, and most of our children who were diagnosed at birth or at 5 or 6 qualify. One ABLE account per qualified person. So it's, for college, you can have 5 529s, but the ABLE, which is a 529A, allows us to only have 1 account per qualified person, which would be our child. So my son can only have 1 ABLE account. Grandma can't set one up, and I can't set one up for him. He can only have 1. I can set it up and grandma put money in it, but he can only have 1 account. The total amount that can be put into that account is the federal gifting amount, and that happens to be $15,000. When this account was started, it was $14,000. It's now $15,000. So the most that can go in 1 year from other people putting money in is a total of $15,000. I can't put 15 in, and grandma can't put 15 in. 15 total can go in. And the maximum amount that can go into it is set by the states. So Illinois, the state I'm in, where I live, has a maximum of $400,000. So that's the amount that can be in the plan. You got some time to worry about that, right? Because you only get $15,000 in a year. All right. But there's 2 things that are kind of bummers about this, but workable, okay? So you can put that $15,000 a year. However, if the account goes over $100,000 at some point, SSI, if your child's still on SSI, will be suspended. Now notice it's not Medicaid and it's not SSDI, it's only SSI, okay? So if it goes over 100, the SSI gets stopped. When it goes below 100, the SSI gets restarted, all right? So if your child, by the time you retire, is not on SSI anymore, but on SSDI, this limit doesn't exist. So something to be aware of, not afraid of. The other thing that people don't like, and we're hoping will be changed over time, is this kind of acts like that payback trust. So from the time we set the ABLE account up, when the child passes away, if there's something in their ABLE account, Medicaid will be paid back for the amount that was spent for Medicaid out of this account. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about what does that mean, and is it only federal, because it's federal law that the state is running. So there's been a lot of states that say, well, we won't go after that. We'll only have to pay back the Medicaid federal dollars and not the state dollars. So keep reading about this. We will keep having educational sessions about this. We're going to be having a series of them from Protected Tomorrows, going with some of the people who run the ABLE account programs coming up in the fall. But just be aware, it's not a reason to not do it. It's just a reason to know that that exists, that that problem exists with that account. A lot of changes occurred. So this was set up, this account was, these ABLE accounts started in like 2016, and by 2018, there were some new things going on with it. The contribution went up to 15 at that point. We can also, if somebody set up a 529 for their a college account for their child and find out they're not going to college, those 529s can be rolled into a 529A. There's some tax credits at the federal level, just like you save into retirement accounts, there's certain kinds of savers credits you get. And then finally, this other one is if your child works, they are able to also contribute some of their work money. So anybody can put 15 in, but the child can also put another additional 12,000 in of their own work money. And that amount varies somewhat by state, but it's about $12,000 that the child themselves can put into this account. And it's a great way to help them save. Okay. All right. Okay, we have a little time left. I'm going to go through one more thing, and then we're going to open it up for questions, right? So let's say you have done everything we've talked about so far. I know we've gone an hour and a half already and we've covered a lot of things. So we got about 10 more minutes of this discussion, then we're going to open it up for questions. Okay, there. So let's say remember, we go back to what do you want and what are you afraid of? Look at that sheet again. Let's talk about that. What's the best thing that could happen for your child? And what are your fears? So you've done the vision, you've done the budget, you've identified your own money and how you think you're going to fund that, which is tough. Sometimes we need help. You've seen the attorney. You've done your legal documents. Maybe you become your child guardian. You got all the benefits you can get. You're always paying attention to benefits. You're doing all this stuff, right? Things will change. Sometimes the pot of money we thought we were going to have goes down. Sometimes it goes up. Sometimes our benefits at work change. We have to change everything. This is not a static process. But this last step kind of ties it together for you and helps you constantly think about it. So I'm going to put myself in the shoes of the person who's going to get the job. I'd like you to do that. So I want you to think back in time a little bit, because we work through all the things you have to know financially for yourself and what you have to think about for retiring, right? You've got to think about your own Social Security, when to take it, how much money you have, how much money you have to be for yourself, all the financial things you need to think about, and then funding all of that money and how it's going to transfer into a trust for your child. So think about what you know. What did you know when your child was 1? How about 3? What did you know when they were 5? Let's say it's their 5th birthday. Think about who was there. It's a cake, 5 candles. Who was at that place? Where was it? Think back. Close your eyes for a minute. Were those people, are they still in your life? Who were your friends back when your child was born? Who were those people? Are they still your friends? Do you have different friends? Maybe you have friends that you've made that are friends of your children's friends' parents. Maybe you had friends that just didn't get your life. Maybe some best friends have stayed with you thick and thin and really been helpful. How many doctors have you seen? How many school teachers just really helped you, and how many kind of failed you in your eyes? Is your child older and you tried a job and it didn't work? Where's your child living now? Are they young? Are they old? Who's been holding your hand through some of these times when you're like, oh, I can't go another day? And who's the person who doesn't really listen to you? How'd you hear about this session? How'd you know to sign up for this? Okay. So when your child was born, what did you know? Really? A lot? Probably nothing, right? So all of a sudden, you're not here for some reason. You know, when I talk about this part, sometimes it's hard because people that I care about have gone through this whole process. But we never expected a year like this year. And then all of a sudden, we have hard decisions to make, right? About schooling, about group homes, about what's going to work for our child to be home with us. How are they struggling? And now we got to think about, if we're not around sometime in the future, maybe this is all going to be gone next year. I'm not going to knock on some wood here. But then 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, or 30 years from now, you're not here. And somebody else will step into your shoes. And something else happens. I don't know what it'll be, right? I was talking to somebody earlier in the day, and we have lived through some really strange stuff over the years. And, you know, when I was young, and we lived through all kinds of protests, flower children, all kinds of stuff. And now there's new kinds of protests, and now there's new kinds of illnesses. There will be different things. And somebody else is going to be in our shoes. and they're going to know what to need to know what to do. They're going to need to know how to act, right? Okay. So we got to tell them. They have not lived our life. I learned this from my mom, who, after my sister passed away, started to talk to me, and then she wrote to me. My mom and dad, later I became their caregiver, and they were, I always asked my mom to write. And then I later learned that she did write, and I found those letters from her. And she told me things about my sister. Now, I was really connected to my sister. I was there all the time. When I wrote, I listened to this stuff my mother wrote, I read it. And by that time she had dementia, she couldn't talk to me about it. My dad was already gone. And my mother was writing about stuff about my sister. I'm like, how in the heck did I never know that? How I couldn't fathom that I didn't know some of these stories she was writing to me about. So I thought I knew a lot, and then I didn't. So this is why I talk so passionately about this, because it's so important to me that you do this. So something happens to you. Where should your child live? In your house? Is it set up a certain way? Is there a group home you're thinking about? Is there a sibling that's going to step in? What about if your child's still young and something happens to you? And then the new step-in parents are going to become the future guardian, and they're going to be making decisions about your child's education, and there's an IEP meeting, and they think it's a PTA meeting, parent-teacher meeting, okay? It's not. What about if your child's tried to work? Has it worked? Has it not worked? Are there jobs that just were really bad? We always know that we're supposed to pass on medical information. But sometimes we think medical information means what's happening today. And what really medical information means is what medical information is history. Never see this doctor, never try this med, do this worked, this didn't work. If somebody is going to step in your shoes, they're not going to have an operating manual unless you create it. Social life. So it's not just the medical stuff. It's maybe if you become a guardian for somebody's child who's typical, maybe you'll understand their social life. But maybe for a child with special needs, they need to know more. And then finally, the little routines that make things work. We as parents have put together safety nets and routines that work. We need to tell people about this. We just do. And so we need to write it down somehow. We have a whole thing on our website that you can use, My Special Life, where you can input everything and print it out as a book, or you can pass the username and password along. I don't care how you do it. You just need to do this. It's such an important step. Because as we retire, and we don't do it just once, right? Because as we retire, we're learning things. We live through times like this, we're learning things. The older we get, the more we understand our child, and the more we need to communicate that. We need to tell our family about it. We need to share it. Now, as part of this whole sharing part, this is where the dream team comes into play. Remember I talked about in the beginning about the dream team? So the dream team, we talked about having guardians, we talked about having trustees, okay? We talked about all those different players. And there's a coach. Now, many times I'm the coach. Maybe you have somebody else who can be your coach. But you gotta have somebody who you're accountable to make this happen. You need to have someone who's an objective person to say, I don't know if that person's really going to be a trustee. The attorney can ask those questions, okay? And ask you what the skill sets of the trustees. And then you have all these teams. Now, these people might not have official jobs, but they might be the people you're going to count on. They might be people like daily support. Maybe there's going to be a job coach you want to tell people about. Maybe there's personal assistants over time and service providers. The doctors, we talked about all the medical information that you need to put into place. And there's all kinds. Professionals, there's financial advisors, insurance agents, trust company. And I'll tell you before we wrap up about some new opportunities in that arena that we've just started to work through. There's the attorneys. So all those people that you put in place. There's the guardians. Maybe you're not going to be guardian. Maybe there's going to be a person to be a power of attorney. There's just people who are advocates. People who are going to work for your child to make sure that the benefits don't fall apart, that you're doing, but somebody else is going to step in. Who are those people you're going to put on the team? What about groups and programs your child belongs to that you want to make sure that these other people know about? What about faith supports? A lot of people belong to special groups within their church and their synagogue or whatever it is. wow, this is how you get peace of mind. Documenting all these things and going to the people and saying, could you be part of our team? One of the things I know family tell us all the time is they have no one in their family, or they don't want to burden somebody in the family to be the trustee. We have recently, because I've been doing this for now, this is our 30th year, and I want to make sure that for my family and for my clients' families and for other people's families, that I just talked to someone the other day and they were in their 80s and their child's 50. And they don't have anybody that they really want to choose to be the person who's going to be the trustee, the one who's going to make sure the money is spent right, and they're going to be the conduit between the family member and the trust. And they don't want to have somebody has to have that trustee job. And so we have found an organization that's part of Schwab. It's their trust company, not the money management piece, but the trust company that has always wanted to do special needs trust, but they didn't have the special needs connection. And so we are partnering with them to help do some of that, so that that's a resource for families that we can talk to families about, that maybe that's a part of the professional team that can be put in place. I don't know. We're trying to go through all of these and say, what are all the groups out there? And build a network of all the groups and the advocates and all of that. It's you don't have to be alone to do some of this. There's all kinds of resources out there to try to build that. So it's a lot of work. I'm gonna close with one thing that you can start doing for me while, if there's some questions that Mary can read to me, and I'm happy to answer them. And we're gonna take questions. We have about 10 minutes left. And if I can't answer all of them and there's too many questions, we will always respond to the group and let you know what their answers are. But the last step I want to do before we close and start with questions is I want you to think back how I started, because I covered a lot. I mean, this has been a long session, I think, for some of you, but hopefully you're sitting at home and relaxing while we do it. And if you missed a piece, you can always re-listen to it. But I like to have in my life someone who holds me accountable. I call him my accountant, but it's not my banking accountant. It's not my financial person who does my taxes. It's the person that maybe is my coach. And so you looked at a lot of things that you probably need to do. Maybe it's look at your trust to see if it's very revocable. Maybe it's to pull out your Social Security records. Maybe it's to start writing a book about your child. I don't know what yours is, but I do know that we all have a lot to do. You probably wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't have a lot to do. And I know that if we write down 20 things that I have to do, the likelihood of me doing them is not very good, because life is so crazy. I said, somebody asked me, are you busy? And I said, I've never been as busy as I have been through this pandemic, because I'm trying to keep all the pieces, all the plates spinning, and all the things happening, and people are fearful, and I'm trying to keep people not to be fearful. So I'm busy, and still I need to keep things moving, right? And so when somebody says to me, but you got 10 things on your list you got to do today, I get a little overwhelmed. And so I have to step back and say, what's the most important thing I will do? Because if I do that, I'll feel good about it, and then I'll do 2, and then I'll do 3. And so that's the basics of our 8-step process, is do 1, only do 1. And then after 1, we'll push you along to 2, okay? So I call them a guilt card. Write down or tell someone, if you want to mail me a postcard with it, I will bug you, or mail it to a friend, or mail it to the organization, mail it to Denise. Sorry, Denise, I'm sending you send you things. Tell people what the first thing you're going to do is. Don't pick 10, pick 1, and write down that thing and give it to somebody to hold for you, and then ask them to remind you of it at some point. Okay, whatever it is, whatever you decided was the most important thing you heard tonight, and start, because that will be a really important place to begin and get going. All right, so I think I have told you a lot. What I'd like to do is see if there's any questions that I can answer. So Mary, would you like to let me know if there's any questions?
We do have a couple. One of them had to do with the beginning part of your presentation, and they wanted to know what happens if they receive a railroad pension instead of Social Security. It's kind of the same, but not.
Yeah, that is very similar. And and it's kind of a broad question, but railroad has very, very similar provisions. And so it is important to just, again, I would go into your system for railroad and get your benefits. And if you are really confused by that, give us a call or email us and we'll try to help you through that. But it's very, very, very similar to Social Security.
The next question that people want to know, why do I need an ABLE account if I have a special needs trust? And then if I have a special needs trust, why do I need an ABLE?
Very good question. I love that. Okay. A special needs trust can hold a lot of money. Remember, it can hold $1 billion. And an ABLE account can't hold that much. You can only put $15,000 a year away. So if you only had an ABLE account and you put $15,000 for the year away and then you died, you'd only have $15,000. So the special needs trust allows you to put the big money away, and the ABLE account allows you to put the smaller amounts away short term. What else does the ABLE account do? Sometimes I do a whole presentation on ABLE and we didn't have time to do the whole thing. But an ABLE account, let's say your child's account gets to more than $2,000. It's a perfect place when your account gets close to $2,000 to move money from your child's account to the ABLE. Okay? The ABLE account also can be controlled by your child. So many of the ABLE accounts run by the states have debit cards. And so you want your child to control some money. And so the ABLE account allows them to control that. Okay? They cannot control the money in the special needs trust. So we have two tools. One is more of a daily function and one is a big money function. The other thing is when I pass away, I want to make sure that the ABLE account exists and holds some money that my child can control. And then maybe the payee, whoever the payee is on the Social Security, is paying those bills. I want my child to have that account with the money in it so they can go, if they want to go somewhere, they have a debit card to use. But I want it filled every year because I don't want to have a lot of money in that because of the payback. So I wanted my special needs trust to have language in it that says once a year, move $15,000 from my special needs trust to the ABLE or whatever the trustee feels is needed by the person. So the ABLE is kind of a daily working thing, and the special needs trust holds the big money, if that's helpful. The one other thing that's a really useful tool for the ABLE account is the special needs trust is not supposed to pay rent. It can own a home, and then the child could pay rent to it or live there in a house free. But it's not supposed to pay rent because that is basic support. But the ABLE account can pay rent. So if my child is living in a place where it's rental and their disability check isn't enough, but they want to live there, I can actually put money in their ABLE account and the ABLE account can help them pay rent. So there's all these nuances, and we have a whole session on ABLE that you might want to learn more about it. Is how you use the ABLE. But sometimes I will tell you, sometimes attorneys say you only need the special needs trust, but the child doesn't, it depends on your child, but sometimes you want the child to control money, and that's a really great tool for that.
Our next question our participant wants to know, you talked about legal documents and, we're getting ready to get those done, but what happens if we move to a different state? Do we need to change our legal documents, our ABLE accounts? Anything else?
Okay, so let's talk about ABLE accounts first. So ABLE accounts are by state. If you're in Florida, the Florida ABLE account will only allow for the Florida residents, no new non-residents. If you're in the Illinois plan allows anybody, okay? If you're in the Illinois plan and you're an Illinois resident, you might get a tax deduction. So you might want to look at which ABLE account you want to use, and if you move, you could always move it to that state if there's a reason to move it. On legal documents, special needs trust can cross states and your trust can cross across states. If I create one in Illinois, I'm okay. I might have to have my will changed or my powers of attorney changed for myself. But if I have a trust set up for my son in Illinois and I move to California, that is just fine. They do cross over on states.
The last question we have for now was talking about, you'd mentioned the dream team. How do we determine who the best corporate trustee should be?
So corporate trustees, they need to be a big enough company so they're always around, A. If it's a small bank, I wouldn't necessarily recommend a small bank because small banks get bought up. I can tell you bank after bank. I saw someone today who had a bank and trust company that doesn't exist. It was 10 banks ago and they did their documents in 2005, which is why we started to search out and find somebody. It's got to be a trust company that will take smaller dollars as well as large dollars. If I'm going to be with a bank that only takes a $10 million account, a lot of people that doesn't work. And the trust company also has to have knowledge of special needs. Many of them don't take special needs account, and I will tell you Schwab did not until they met us and we talked about how we can, provide those resources and educate them. So the trust company has to have a reason to want to do it. And there's people at Schwab that have family member with special needs, and some of them worked in the world of special needs at some point, so they had an interest in it. And I think it's a large enough organization. So they'll take small dollars or large dollars. But so you got to look at your trust company and say, is it a trust company that A, will even take a special needs trust? And do we think they'll be around long enough to be there as long as we need them? So that would be some of my criteria.
Well, thank you very much, Mary Anne. We'd like to thank everybody for attending this evening's class. It has been recorded for future reference, and you'll be able to access it in the near future by logging onto the Community Partners website or the Protected Tomorrows website. Information on how to view the video will be sent to you via email once the video has been uploaded. The homework and the handouts will be attached to that email as well. This concludes this evening's presentation. Thank you again for your participation. And as always, if you have any questions or would like more information, please feel free to contact us at any time. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much, and to Community Partners too, to allow us to present this to the group. Thank you again. Have a nice day and a nice evening.